Well, a jury is deciding the fate of Sean Diddy Combs. Jurors have been sent out to decide whether the hip-hop mogul is guilty or not in his sex trafficking trial. No verdict was reached on day one of deliberations, as US correspondent Marley Hogan reports.
Well, today, an hour into deliberation, there was already a jury note. Why? The foreperson said that they had concerns that juror number 25 was unable to follow the judge's instructions. Now, if you're the defense or the prosecution, you're immediately wondering why it would be an hour into deliberations that this would come up.
The courtroom is quiet now, but the tension couldn't be louder. After 7 weeks of jaw-dropping allegations, disturbing witness accounts, and intense legal sparring, jurors in the federal trial of Sean Diddy Combs have finally begun deliberating. The stakes? Nothing short of the rest of his life. With the possibility of a life sentence hanging over his head, the hip-hop titan, once untouchable in music, fashion, and reality TV, is now at the mercy of 12 everyday citizens. Behind closed doors, 8 men and 4 women are combing through weeks of graphic testimony, accounts of alleged abuse, manipulation, and twisted sex parties described as freak-offs or hotel nights. These weren't just salacious headlines, they were centerpieces of the prosecution's case, painted as the building blocks of a dark and violent enterprise. And after more than 2 hours of meticulous legal instruction from Judge Aaron Subramanian, the jury now holds the fate of a man once considered music royalty. No cameras, no microphones, just 12 people, a mountain of testimony, and a verdict that could bring down one of the biggest names in entertainment history.
It is day 2 of deliberations here at the trial involving Sean Diddy Combs. Of course, the most serious charge is that racketeering conspiracy where he is facing up to life in prison. He's also looking at charges involving sex trafficking and the transportation for prostitution.
Another note handed to the judge from the jury. This comes after yesterday, just before dismissal, the jury asked the judge for clarification on what constitutes a drug distributor.
At the heart of this trial lies a list of charges that sound more like a criminal empire than a celebrity scandal. Sean Diddy Combs isn't just fighting for his freedom, he's facing accusations that could redefine how we view one of music's biggest moguls. The most serious, racketeering conspiracy, a charge usually reserved for mob bosses and drug kingpins. Prosecutors claim Combs didn't act alone, but rather ran a structured criminal network that preyed on women and thrived on fear, secrecy, and power. To convict him on that charge alone, jurors have to agree on 8 separate elements, each one painting Combs as the ringleader of an organized web of abuse and coercion. But that's just the beginning. He's also facing 2 separate counts of sex trafficking, one tied to longtime ex-girlfriend Cassie Ventura, whose testimony lit up headlines, and another involving a Jane Doe who took the stand for 6 emotional days. Both accounts describe a world of control and degradation cloaked in luxury. And then there's the final count, transporting individuals for the purpose of prostitution, a federal offense that adds more fuel to an already raging fire. While racketeering could land him behind bars for life, even a single guilty verdict would devastate his legacy. The jury's task: separate myth from man and decide whether the empire Sean Combs built was powered by ambition or by exploitation. Now it's in their hands. 12 jurors, 8 men and 4 women, are locked in deliberation, charged with unraveling one of the most disturbing and high-profile trials in recent memory. After sitting through nearly 2 months of emotional testimony and courtroom theatrics, they spent over 2 hours listening to the judge's final instructions. A legal roadmap on how to weigh the evidence and reach a fair, unanimous decision. But the truth is, no amount of guidance can prepare a jury for the kind of story they've just lived through. Judge Aaron Subramanian reminded them of the gravity of their role. Every verdict must be unanimous. No juror should abandon their beliefs just to make peace in the room. And yet, they'll need full agreement across all 12 to convict Combs on any charge. That alone sets the stage for tension behind the scenes. If even one juror hesitates, if even one finds reasonable doubt, it could mean a hung jury or partial acquittal. Just like in the Harvey Weinstein trial, a split verdict is on the table. Jurors can request clarifications from the judge. They can ask to review key testimony or revisit specific exhibits. And when that happens, it often reveals more than they intend. Clues about which charges are creating friction, which witnesses left doubts, and where the group might be divided. So while deliberations are supposed to be private, every request, every delay, every silence becomes its own form of suspense. And right now, the world is waiting to see what direction that silence will take. Inside the courtroom, you wouldn't know lives were hanging in the balance until you looked closer.
Sean Diddy Combs sat motionless at the defense table, dressed in a cream-colored shirt, his glasses resting on his face, hands clasped tightly in front of him. A man once known for commanding stages and red carpets now looked like someone bracing for impact. He wasn't pacing or posturing. He quietly asked the judge for a book, something to pass the time, as his fate was quietly debated just a few walls away. Directly behind him sat his family. The front row, reserved for Combs himself, held the stoic presence of his 3 sons and 3 daughters. His mother, Janice Combs, sat beside them, her expression unreadable. 7 children, 1 courtroom, and a legacy on the line. The seats were filled, but the room felt heavy with silence. Everyone was waiting, but no one knew what for. It wasn't the noise that made the moment tense, it was the stillness. Every shifting chair, every whispered word between attorneys, every glance exchanged between family members felt loaded with meaning. This wasn't a circus, it was the eye of the storm. And outside those doors, the jury had begun the process of deciding whether this man, father, mogul, icon, would walk out the front doors of the courthouse or be led out the back in handcuffs.
Throughout the trial, the jury may have been silent, but they were never unreadable. Court watchers noticed it, the attorneys noticed it, and so did the press. While the world focused on Sean Combs's every expression inside the courtroom, attention quietly shifted toward the people who would ultimately decide his fate. And their reactions, subtle but telling. Some jurors sat stiff, stone-faced, eyes fixed on witnesses as they described alleged abuse, manipulation, and trauma. Others occasionally glanced down, scribbling notes, or shifted in their seats during the most disturbing parts of testimony, especially when Cassie Ventura and Jane Doe described the so-called freak-offs and alleged coercion behind closed doors. At times, a juror would narrow their eyes. Other times, they'd glance briefly toward the defense table, their expressions unreadable but not disengaged. A few seemed visibly more invested, leaning in during expert testimony, reacting subtly when audio or video evidence was played. According to jury consultants, these micro-reactions don't guarantee how someone will vote, but they do hint at internal conflict or emotional impact. That matters in a case where credibility is everything, and the evidence is as dark as it is personal. But as Judge Subramanian reminded them, emotion isn't enough. They were instructed to focus on facts, apply the law, and discuss the case as a group, free from bias, fear, or outside influence. And that's the great unknown, because even the most attentive faces in the jury box can walk into deliberations with wildly different perspectives. Now, those silent signals become the quiet foundation for the most important conversation of all. Now comes the waiting game, but with stakes this high, every possible outcome carries shockwaves. If the jury finds Sean Diddy Combs guilty on all charges, it could mean a life sentence. That would not only end his career, but send a thunderous message through the entertainment industry. No amount of money, fame, or legacy can shield you from the law. That's the prosecution's goal, to prove Combs didn't just dabble in bad behavior, but orchestrated a criminal enterprise built on fear, control, and exploitation. But there's also the possibility of a split verdict, a situation where jurors convict on some charges, but not others. It's happened before. In cases like Harvey Weinstein's, jurors agreed on some counts, but couldn't reach consensus on others. The same could unfold here, a guilty finding on sex trafficking, for instance, but not on racketeering, or vice versa. It all depends on how jurors interpret the evidence, the credibility of key witnesses, and whether they believe the prosecution tied Combs directly to each act beyond a reasonable doubt. Then, of course, there's the outcome that would send a very different kind of shockwave: complete acquittal. If jurors aren't convinced, if even one charge doesn't meet the legal threshold, Combs could walk free. And while that wouldn't erase the damage to his public image, it would leave the justice system with unfinished business and a deeply divided public. 12 people, one decision, and no matter what that verdict says, the world watching will have something to say right back. Somewhere behind closed doors, 12 jurors are debating a decision that could collapse a global empire or leave it standing. No cameras, no headlines, just 12 people, buried in memory, evidence, and doubt. Each moment that passes without a verdict only sharpens the tension, because no one knows if that silence means consensus or chaos. Inside the courthouse, the stillness is deceptive. Combs' team is on edge, his family, still present, barely flinches. Reporters hang on to whispers, and everyone else, fans, critics, former collaborators, are refreshing their feeds, waiting for the words that could end it all: guilty or not guilty. This is no longer a music story, it's a cultural reckoning, and every minute of deliberation feels like a countdown to impact. Because when that verdict finally comes, and it will, there's no walking it back. It's either the beginning of Sean Combs' next chapter or the end of everything he's built. The jury holds the pen. The rest of us, we're just waiting to read the final line.